introduce yourselves, and I'll be monitoring the chat, and then we can open things up for questions.
Eric Schnadig, father of Adrian, husband of Isabel, and co-founder of Reach.
Hi, I'm Liz Crawford. My son Malachi, who is almost 14 years old, was born with short segment Hirschsprung's disease. And I've been involved with Reach pretty close to the beginning. I'm from Canada. So we work together in a collaboration and a partnership. So we have been working to raise awareness and obviously fundraising. And one of the key things that I think that Eric and I talked about when I first joined was the importance of community. And so that's sort of my role within is sort of, helping to be that liaison between our board and community and patients and families. So it's given me a unique opportunity that I'm really honored to have, that I get to hear so many stories and connect with so many of you. And so we understood the importance of, again, we always have this little portion because, well, Eric always says, this is really the core of it, is how can we support our families? So I'm thrilled to be here. Thank you.
I'm Nicole Perry, and my son Benjamin right there has Hirschsprung's, and I have been a part of Reach for 5 years now. Liz found me. Well, I found Liz first through a ton of research and learning about Hirschsprung's, and the most information I got was from the Reach website. And I think I just kept reaching out to Liz with question after question after question. And after a while, she's like, you want to be a part of the board?
Right.
Do you want to join us and help us with our initiative and growing the community? So that's how I'm here.
Okay.
I'll use this one.
So a big part of this kind of segment for us is not so much us sitting and sharing our stories. We're happy to do that. But a lot of what I think has been successful in the past and what we enjoy is hearing a lot about what you as families are going through, your stories. And so at any point, I think this is pretty informal. Right, Eric? Yeah. We just, hand you a mic and let's just talk. So think of this more as our coffee and conversation version, because we do as parents understand all of the obstacles and struggles that, we all go through. And the medical information is obviously life-changing and so important, but sometimes it's really nice to hear. I know for me personally, being in all these situations with my son Malachi, having somebody else that goes, yeah, that sucks. And yeah, it's so frustrating because we know we don't know. Or yes, I know that night was so horrible and you got through it. Way to go. Or, is there any of us that hasn't been covered in poop from head to toe? I know I have. All these like weird and funny things you never thought would happen to you in your life. But it's like now you're in this world. So that's kind of what this is. And I'll bounce this back to you, Eric, to kick off.
Yeah, well, I think in that vein, maybe we could open it up to the parents who are here, the families, doctors, practitioners. What stories can you share with us? What are your biggest struggles? What would you like to talk about?
I'm going to start with a question, if that's okay. So quite a few people that we have on the chat are local and they're younger. Their children are younger than your children. So I guess earlier we discussed how to counsel people about Hirschsprung disease and what happens in the future. So for you all who are now parents of children that are older, what do you wish you knew, or what advice would you give to somebody with a younger child with Hirschsprung disease? And then I'm going to take it and use it as my own and take credit for it. So it'll be
okay. I think for me personally, I think knowing that to me, it was like, if I could go back and tell me 12, 13 years ago when we were in the height of it, because of course, Malachi was born, it took a month to figure out what was going on. He was in ICU. We had many trips to the emergency, well, 23 actually. So 23 different hospitalizations between birth and 3 years old. If I could go back and tell me to breathe, knowing that it's okay. And knowing and tell myself that, you know what, you got this. You are actually his greatest advocate. Don't say I could get emotional with that.
Yeah. No, but it's true, right?
No, it's true. And I think that knowing that is just, it totally changes the game, because when you believe like, oh yeah, right now I got a handle on this, tomorrow's going to come, it's going to be okay. it changes things. You start to see, further down the road and you see a better outcome. So really just knowing that you are your child's best advocate and that it is going to be okay.
It is. Yeah,
And
no,
do-
I agree. I would say you're your child's biggest advocate until they need to be their biggest advocate, right?
Right.
Like, I feel like that's one thing that I really wanted to implement with Benjamin was like, I was ready to be his biggest advocate and fight and fight and fight for him. But then at some point, your kid will show you without even saying anything, I'm ready to advocate for myself. I'm ready to start. And that's when you got to know, I would tell my younger self, know when to let him advocate, know
Sure.
when the time is right, that it doesn't have to be all on your shoulders, but they can speak for themselves. They can express how they're feeling and what they're going through. I
Yeah.
think that'd be for me
Yeah.
personally.
And I think also, just going to add this in there, there's not one HD parent that I've met that hasn't suffered from some level of PTSD. So to me, I think it's through the roof. Sometimes like I can go back and remember, being afraid to, I'm the first time I started to travel without my son, I think he was 8 or 9. I look over at my niece, Grace, who's here, and crying every time the plane took off because just that sort of need to control. So there's so many of those things that we didn't allow. For ourselves. So understanding how the disease also impacts you as a parent and what you can do to actually take care of yourself through that process.
Oh, I agree.
Yeah. So from a practical standpoint, I think one of the key milestones for us was developing a comfort, and then a reliance on giving bowel irrigations. That gave us the degree of control and confidence to at least keep Adrian out of the hospital. And it took us a while to develop that competence. So I think just practically speaking, to answer the question, that's an important skill that I wish the docs had frankly taught us how to do. They did eventually. But I think that really should be part of the standard of care for parents of infants with HD. Less of a factor pre-pull through than, post. In fact, not a factor pre-pull through, but post pull through, that's critical. I think the other practical piece of advice I would give to parents is to trust your intuitions about your child. And I think that is a compliment to what Nicole and Liz were talking about, but in the sense that when your child's not well, and just when that happens, follow that through to the end, whatever that may be, until your child gets the kind of care that he or she needs.
I'll also just add, because in the US, you do your pull through surgery right away. So in Canada, Malachi was 6 months and we still will wait. I'm looking for Dr. Langer for confirmation on that. So the irrigations, actually, we are taught in Canada right away. And we do those 3-4 times a day until we get to 5-6 months when we have surgery. So it depends, I think, on the hospital, but in Canada, we don't do the surgeries right away.
Yeah, can I just want to clarify
Jack, just one sec. That's Liz telling me that in Canada, they do everything better.
Just different.
But also better.
No, I concur that we do everything. But so it's clear there is variability both in Canada and in the United States about the timing of a pull through when a diagnosis is made as a newborn. And I think there was a recent survey that was done, and it's really all over the map. There's no good evidence that one approach is better than another approach. So it's just up to your individual surgeon and center.
But I would agree completely without knowing how to do an irrigation, because I don't think, and I look at Jack and Ellen here, but anything can go wrong. You can't, do an irrigation, have a terrible side effect of that. So if you think your child may have enterocolitis, or you think your child may have an obstruction, but you're not 100% sure, and you can't get into the doctor right away, or you're feeling things are getting dicey, you're best to know it and do it, than not to do it, because nothing terrible is going to happen from doing it. They just might be a little extra cleaned out, right? Essentially. So agreed with Eric. See, in the end, I agree.
There's a question in the chat related to basically, how do you help with your child's social support? How do you inform your child's friends, teachers through the kind of stages of aging as they grow up? And how have you handled that?
So, with Benjamin, we started with me in kindergarten going into the classroom and with Benjamin explaining what he had. He's now in 4th grade and now he does it on his own. Thank you to Eric for writing that book. We were able to bring the book into the school and kind of let the teachers share the book with the students the last couple of years. But we started right away. We started immediately having Benjamin let everybody know, hey, I have this rare disease and I might poop, I might fart in class, you might hear me, it might be awkward, but it's okay and it's normal. And we wanted him to go in that way so that it didn't start after the first, BM in the classroom or a fart and somebody be, oh, that smells so weird. We wanted him to be ahead of it. So I think that's was our approach, was immediately, as soon as you can, as soon as your child feels comfortable, as soon as you feel comfortable. I think schools are open to having parents come in and talk. Everybody was really receptive to us. I had parents email me afterwards going, hey, my son came home and said that your son said this at school. Can you please explain so that I better understand, when I come and volunteer in the classroom about your son's needs or about what's going on with your son. So I think it's really just as soon as you can, advocate and let them advocate in school for what they have going on and share it, be proud of it, wear it as a badge of honor almost.
Yeah. And I think that's really worked in your household, like
It
really,
has,
like
yeah.
Benjamin's doing amazing. My son, on the other hand, is a lot more introverted and would be mortified if I took the same approach. So knowing my son and knowing who your kids are. So with Malachi, he always wanted things to be a little bit more on the down low. So I just worked with the school and he used a separate bathroom. He had a little yoga mat they gave him that he could lay down because the pressure on his tummy when he was little helped alleviate gas. And so he had his own sort of private sacred space. He then became more and more open about it. And he would tell people that he had Hirschsprung disease, but he certainly doesn't like it when I tell him. I used to have a blog. I quit doing that because it's like, okay, Mom, that's enough of that. I don't want the whole world to know that I struggle to poop. So, he's a very different kid that way. So I think a part of it too is knowing your kid and knowing what works for them and their comfort level and having those conversations and asking them, like, is it okay if, Mom or Dad does this or that? And just trying to, in most schools, I think they want to protect the child. So they will work with you to create that safe space.
So in our case, Adrian has Down syndrome. So we have an extra set of challenges. But in some ways, socially, it's a little bit easier, I suppose. Some of the things that we've done with his teachers and with the school are to put in place an IEP, and which he has anyway for his Down syndrome. And I guess in other parts of the country, it may be called something different, a 504, which I learned today. Thank you. And in that document, we spell out what he has and what some of the approaches are. And I think that's been helpful.
And that was exactly the next question. Are schools open to providing a 504 medical plan for kids with Hirschsprung? If so, how have you gone about getting one?
After Benjamin's secondary pull through, I'm pretty sure Dr. Goldstein wrote like an email that had like 5 bullet points. It was like, here's what he would need at school. And they literally took that and created the 504. And to this day, I mean, Benjamin didn't go to the first day of 4th grade. Benjamin's never had an issue with going to school, but his classrooms are now outside in a portable building, and the nearest bathroom is 5 minutes away. So Benjamin has access to the nurse's bathroom, which is 6 minutes away. Teacher's bathroom, nearest one, is 5 minutes away, and then the regular bathroom is 5 minutes away. And he was so worried about going to school, but his 504 allowed for him to have that extra day and not have to go to school on the first day without, feeling like he was missing out on such a big day. They still made it a big deal when he did go, but he has accommodations, right? He, like Malachi, gets to use the nurse's restroom. He has a pass that nobody else in the class has, that he can go whenever he needs to go. And I think really the schools are so open to it because it protects you and the student, but it also protects the school, right? So they can't, feel at fault. I feel like there's so much hyper awareness that what if we do something wrong? And so I think you really just talk to your doctor. I talked to Alan, I said, here's what we need for Benjamin to have in place, and he typed it up and school implemented it with no issues.
Excellent.
I just want to add to that, it is really important for the healthcare providers to be proactive and to provide that kind of documentation, and not, colorectal centers where we're doing it all the time. It's one thing. We have nurse practitioners, but a lot of people out there who are being managed by just a regular pediatric surgeon without that kind of support, they may not know that they have to provide those kind of letters. So it's actually something that maybe REACH could work on is a template for people to then give to their doctor, who can then kind of write the letter, and they don't have to start from scratch every time.
That's a great suggestion.
That is a wonderful suggestion.
How about our families here today? So where is everybody from? I know that we have some people from Illinois, right?
Texas.
Texas,
there.
right? Okay, that's awesome. Okay,
Fallon, Missouri.
Fallon, Missouri. So you're from here. Okay, excellent. And you have a 11-year-old. No, sorry.
I have a 9-year-old with Down syndrome, autism, and Hirschsprung's, and then I also have an 11-year-old,
Right.
mostly typically developing. But I agree with what Eric said. Like my older son actually was able to go into my younger son's classrooms when they were in the same elementary school with like little bookmarked pages to read to his class so they can understand. He already had the IEP, but still the kids question and ask, especially as he's getting older. He's 9 now and he's still in diapers. And so they'll ask, and I try to be as open and honest with them as much as I can. And then I've noticed they tend to be more accepting of Easton. As far as at home, my current issue that I would love to ask you guys, I don't know if you've been through this. I was kind of talking to Eric or anybody else. We're phasing out of regular size diapers, and I don't get Medicaid or anything like that because we don't qualify for it. So I was wondering what you guys used then or now. We need the diaper tab style, not the pull-up style, because we deal with lots of rash and ointments and it's a big old mess. So I didn't know if anybody had advice on that.
I've had some creative family members kind of hand sew some cover up ones. But as far as sometimes writing a special letter of medical necessity, even in certain situations to try to get that pushed through, even if it's just not the big number that we may need for the whole month, but at least we can get partial coverage. I've worked with companies on that before. So that might be an option as far. Yeah, happy to help.
Okay.
So that might help with the, economic assistance. I think the sort of technical deficit, because we graduated from diapers to the good night pull-ups, but they don't have tabs. Maybe you cut the good nights and fashion the tab on your own. I guess I'm showing my entrepreneurial roots here. I'm not sure there's a huge market for it, but God, I mean, if we all imagine how much we spent on diapers and through the journey of her.
Right. Yeah,
Anyhow.
no, for sure. Thank you for sharing that.
Some other families, like to talk a little bit about your stories, your children, your challenges.
I think the earlier question too about in the chat about kids in school was also social support. So at what, ages did you feel more comfortable allowing your kids to do all the other things that kids did? And what type of accommodations did you put in place?
I can honestly say half of our issues in our house were probably me. My son, if I had just stopped being such a helicopter parent, was probably better socially than his mother, because you know those protective instincts kick in and you fear all the things that could potentially happen, which most of them honestly never did. And if I had let him navigate a bit more and tried not to protect him every step of the way, I would have learned a little bit. But I think, you know, kids are amazing. Like, honestly, they're amazing. I would say that with Malachi, and for him, it was like I found between, I look over at Grace because I would say between, you know, he at home, he was always really social, but I would say like 7 and 9, he kind of came out of his shell a lot more and then went back in preteen. And now I feel like he's starting to emerge again. So I just like regular ebbs and flows of any kid, but I do think that he's always needed a little bit more support with his confidence. But other than that, I think it's mostly his mother that was affected.
And, and Benjamin's so extroverted, right? Benjamin's
Yeah.
exactly like me. So he's super extroverted. And the only real accommodation we had to make socially was when he decided he wanted to start playing sports and he still had a cicostomy. That was a challenge. And ace bandages. That's what I did. I wrapped him with 4 ace bandages before he went and played soccer. 4 before is just so that it protected his button and it gave me that peace of mind. And that was that my helicopter, right? I'm like that, and just so it wouldn't protrude out. But once that was done, I think that's the only real social accommodation. But Benjamin is just so extroverted himself that he'll talk about it. Right now he's super shy, right? Because there's a ton of people in here. But he also like Benjamin is surrounded by so many people like Liz and Grace and, you know, Dr. Goldstein, everybody who is so encouraging of, you know, just you are who you are.
Yeah. And I do like this camp that came up. You were out of the room, but we were talking about camp. And I thought that's interesting because the one thing that my son, his very best friend in the world, was a little boy who had Crohn's disease. And so they could sit and actually talk about a lot of the things that they both went through, which made it normalize stuff. So that was really, really important, that relationship. Yes.
I learned from Eric that when they travel, Adrian sometimes has some challenges with the GI tract. And so I was curious what precautions do you take when you travel away from home overnight? And do you find that travel disrupts sort of their normal GI habits?
Well, I know it does. Okay. Oh, absolutely. Traveling has always been, and because Malachi was dependent with irrigations and enemas with me, he had to travel with me a lot. And definitely, so even before we left, we would find out where the nearest pediatric surgeon with Hirschsprung's experience was to wherever I was going. And one time we were on a flight to Boston and I said to the girls, notice your chip bag. It's going to explode. The air in there is going to explode. And Malachi said, that's my colon. Like he just knew. He just said, when I fly, it's like I'm just the gas pains and everything. So when he was little, we told him that his onesie pajamas was like a flight suit. So he bought into this wholeheartedly, and we'd be flying all over the place and he'd be in his little pajamas. And so that way he was comfortable and he could lay down, and pretty much the whole plane was in on it. I mean, I look over at my team here and we've all experienced it with Malachi where he's laying across our legs and we're rubbing his back and like the accommodations we made, but it was okay because it was his norm and everybody was kind of in on it. But definitely I found that within the first 24 to 30 hours of getting somewhere, there was definitely, we had to work it out. We had to make sure they had a bowel movement, make sure they had a lot of tummy time. As he got older, it definitely got better. He seemed to outgrow that by about 6 or 7 or 8. But that was definitely the experience between 3 and 7. It was always a thing.
Ours, not so much with travel as much as destination. When we get there, a lot of walking. Benjamin, you know, when we don't really vacation anywhere but Disney, sorry to my husband. But our Disney days, right? We would get him up an hour before we planned to leave to get him cleaned out. And without a doubt, halfway through our day at Disney, he's like, I need an hour on the toilet. Like I need to go for a while just from all that movement and walking
food
and different food and foods out of his norm. So we would always accommodate for my husband and him to go back to the hotel or us to all go back and give Benjamin time to evacuate again before then we went and resumed our Disney affairs.
Yeah.
So we've had a lot of challenging travel stories. And I think part of it's just been bad luck, like Adrian catching a bug on the way out and then landing in a destination and really having a mess on our hands in more ways than one. In fact, this really led to the creation of the HD passport, because we found ourselves in Mexico with, no real way to explain what was going on and having to make an emergency hospital visit, even in parts in the US, same thing. For some reason, that hasn't completely dissuaded us from traveling, even though it probably should. So we've, forged on. I thank God for my wife once again, who, when we travel, will put, sort of all the irrigation kit in multiple luggages, because it's also happened to us that we lost the bag that had all the irrigation supplies got lost, which, was another story. But I do have to relay one more recent story. We were on our way back from a sunny destination in March, and Adrian had picked up a bug and had to fly home, and he was still ill, and he was in excruciating pain on the flight back. And he was really literally wailing the entire flight, which was hard on him, hard on us, and hard on everybody else in the airplane. And they were amazing. It was amazing how wonderfully sympathetic the rest of the, people on the flight were. Finally, we got up and got in the middle of the aisle, and Adrian looked around and he just said, "Oh, Jesus." And everyone just cracked up. I mean, this is a nonverbal Down syndrome, obviously in pain kid. I had to tell you that.
That's awesome.
I have a question. Thank you. I don't know how much experience you guys have with this, but relatable to the traveling. So as my son is getting older and he's still in diapers, changing diapers in public, especially for dads, but that's another thing. Do you have any tips or advice for when they may outgrow changing tables?
Right. And we learned to do it standing up, right? Chris, we tag team it in the bathroom, and Chris would had to hold Benjamin up, and I'd kind of do this, and then he's one strap, I'm the other strap. You kind of just teammate it. I guess that's how we always did it, is he just one held and one put the diaper on.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know that there's any easy solution, to be honest with you, because the reality is that 99.9% of kids aren't in this situation, right? And so as Hirschsprung's parents, I feel like we're real experts on the MacGyvering, just give me some duct tape and whatever, I got this,
I mean, right now I just carry extra things. Like we've got blankets, then the absorbency pads. And if I have to, we just go in a handicap stall and lay it all out on the floor and put it in a plastic bag to throw in the wash. I just figured I'd ask. You never know.
No, we haven't figured that one out yet, but
There's a question about the sugar poops. So for children who eat sweets and get the sugar poops, how do you help motivate them to understand why they can't have sugar or need to minimize sugar? This is with respect to a 9-year-old, so kind of a tough age. I guess there's no good age to avoid sweets easily.
I don't know, Malachi actually, he kind of got there on his own.
Yeah,
I'm gonna
I
be
would say
totally
the same
honest.
for me too. With Benjamin, he knows, like if he eats too many Snickers, he's like, oh man, it's gonna be a bad Hirschsprung.
Yeah, I feel like between the ages of 10 and 12, they start to really sort of figure out, Malachi definitely never did well with dairy. And as much as I tried to, always keep away from him, he would go to school and they had pizza day, or they would whatever. So he just wanted to do those things. And now he's 13 and he will not partake in anything because he's associated and he knows it's not worth it. And I really just think that's part of maturity. You can, but when they're not with you, you can control it at home, but when they're not with you, it's difficult.
Benjamin eats sugar, right? He eats candy and stuff. And I think it is. I'd agree. It's just like knowing your own body, and he just knows,
Yeah.
Yeah. So Beverly's mom was sharing just a moment ago Do you
Oh,
want-
Berkeley, Berkeley's
Oh,
mom.
Berkeley, sorry, Berkeley. Berkeley, where are you? Sorry.
No, she's up. My name's Melinda. We have a 4-year-old that has long segment Hirschsprung's. And I was just talking to Eric at the table. So for us, what we've been doing is like maybe this last year, I've been trying to teach her. I mean, I've always taught her, she had an ileostomy her first 18 months. So I've always explained things, tried explaining things to her, even when she might not always understand. But now really, because she's at that age, she started preschool, she's getting invited to birthday parties, we have older nieces, nephews that eat everything normal. And I've always tried to limit things and then kind of introduce things. So now we're at the point this last year where I try to explain things to her, especially when she's pooping or like when she's having stomach pains, like we've learned Bings, that's really hard on her. So I'm explaining to her, okay, look, you had Bings today. This is why your stomach's hurting. You know, we like moderate, trying to teach her moderate. It's hard for a 4-year-old, but I'm just trying to get her to learn to correlate her poops with her pains to how her body's reacting to it. So we went to a birthday party a few months ago and I let her have a cupcake. Well, it was green frosting. And when she pooped, it was literally like green frosting. I mean, it was totally green. So I'm like, hey, look, like that's a really loose stool and it's all green. Do you know why? And she's like, because I had a cupcake and it had green frosting. So that's how we've been trying to go approach it, you know, just trying to teach her to be mindful, like what she's taking in and like what I mean, literally we stand over the toilet and I'm like, this is, you know, hey, this is why it looks like this, or hey, this is what you had today. And I'll ask her questions like, hey, do you know why it looks like that? Or what is that? You know, one day she came back from my mom's. My dad is notorious for giving her all the things that she asked for. And she came back and I was like, her poop looked real like white, powdery. And I was like, so, hey, what did you have at Papa and Wella's house? Oh, Papa gave me powdered donuts. Oh, well, that's why it looked, because I'd never noticed. It just kind of looked like white mold almost. And I was like, oh, okay. And, you know, she told me, and, you know, she's kind of like learning to correlate the things and how her body, how she feels after having certain things. And like about a week ago, she had really bad diarrhea and her stomach was hurting her. And she was literally, and I think she just caught like a little bug. And she was like, Mama, no more sweets, no more tea, you know, because she's starting to learn to, she's starting to learn what we're, you know, trying to teach her and stuff. So
Sure.
that's how we've been trying to approach it.
And I can ask Ellen and Jack, is there a sort of a list of foods that for new parents that are watching that have babies at home, is there, I know there's not an official list of foods we avoid, but foods that you would suggest? Like I know corn has been mentioned in the past. I know dairy has been mentioned in the past, but
Yeah, I think there are some that bother most kids and there's some that just bother some kids. So I just encourage parents to watch carefully for specific foods that bother that child. But sugar really is probably the worst one. Some kids do fine with milk. Some kids have problems with milk, either because of the milk protein or because of the lactose.
Yeah.
So just lactose-free milk doesn't always help,
Yeah.
but sometimes it does.
right.
And a lot of times it's just trial and error, but I rely on our dietitian tremendously because they really are the ones that know the details of all of these things. The other thing that's important is consistency. And unfortunately, a lot of families kind of come apart when there's a chronically ill child. So a lot of my patients, the parents are separated or divorced, and a lot of times one of the two of them isn't with the program. So the child will go, you know, for the weekend to visit dad, and it's usually the dad. It's the mom who's taking care of the child. It's the dad that's not compliant, and they end up getting way behind because so, you know, educating both the parents and sometimes it's grandparents too, who don't really understand and who think they're spoiling the child and, you know, being nice to the child, but they're actually doing a lot of damage. So.
Right.
And I don't know if there's anybody that wants to comment on that from a parent point of view, with maybe some strategies as to how to solve that problem.
I just want to add I think it is very individual. And so it's useful to have a food diary and do what was mentioned earlier, which is really to add one new food at a time because it gets confusing. It seems like kids with Hirschsprungs are more predisposed to food intolerances, but the intolerance can be to totally different things. I've seen milk, soy, sometimes certain vegetables. So it really is about your specific child. And then if they have issues after pull through with constipation or soiling, then diet becomes even more important to avoid
Right.
foods that encourage one or the other.
Right. Benjamin's weird with carbs. Benjamin can't, like, pancakes, French toast, he just knows. He's like, I can't do carbs. But you put a salad in front of that kid and he'll choose that over
Right.
most things, which is great. And I am glad that he likes that. But yeah, we don't do a ton of carbs. He doesn't do well with them. And it really just causes a lot of pain.
Yeah.
But it is individualized. I agree with that because there's things Benjamin eats that other kids can't. And I'm
Sure. Of
wow.
course. Yeah.
There's another question that talks about resources for patients and families with Hirschsprung's disease, camps they may qualify for, and how to get tied into those resources. And maybe we can pan out and show the slide above your head as well as the first point of reference.
So we did Paul Newman camp. So we did the Paul Newman camp and Benjamin was accepted. They have a GI week. So the camps, different parts of the country, they have one in Texas. We were in Colorado at the time and we signed Benjamin up. And unfortunately, the COVID hit right before Benjamin was going to go. It was that summer. But they still, to this day, send Benjamin a seasonal box every 3 months. They send him activities and camp gear and he can get on virtually. He did a virtual camp. I highly recommend it. We've had a great time with it. They do a family week. If you can go in person to the GI week, there's 2 days where the families can go and do this whole camp. And there's archery and horseback riding and all the doctors and nurses on staff are specialized in what your son or daughter's illness is. And so we've loved that camp thoroughly.
And the other option too is with Reach, if you send us a message, we will help try to connect you with other families in your area. So we've had a lot of families say, hey, I'm in, such and such Idaho, or I'm wherever I am. Can you see if there's any other families out this way? So then we will post and try to do some outreach to try to find and connect you with families in your area. So, and that's been actually really successful with some families. They've really connected and made friends, and also not just the kids, but the parents also. So they have that support network.
Maybe that's a good, oh, please.
I was just going to add on, same thing, social networking. I just search, like back when my son was born on Facebook, I searched for Hirschsprung's groups.
Yeah.
And I've sometimes have learned more from those groups, just reading what they post, or you can type in the search bar specifically related issues that you're having. So that's a huge, huge thing, is that community connection.
It is. And I'm going to add to that just because I monitor one for so long. So here's something I want parents to take away though. I find it amazing too. And I actually use it a lot as a source of fact finding, and even sometimes for our researchers. But I'm going to say this also. I want parents and families to hear this. Often the families that have success stories or have, and this is a lot of Hirschsprung's families who don't have complications, they're not on there sharing stories. So you have to keep that into perspective, because I've had new moms who've reached out to me and thought, oh my gosh, like this is what's going to happen and that's going to happen. I read this on the page. And I always say, okay, look, listen, when we're struggling is when we're looking, when we're trying to connect, when we're looking for answers. When we're not, we're not. So it doesn't represent always the vast majority. I just want to throw that out there, because anybody watching at home.
Conversation we had in the car. I literally remember our first meeting in the car, and Liz is like, now hold on, remember.
Yeah.
Great piece of advice, because you taught me well on that one.
Well, because it's scary, because these are, this is the worst of the worst usually.
Yeah,
You know what I mean?
that is so true. And also on the opposite end, because my son has the cognitive impairment too, the Down syndrome and the autism, many times I felt like I couldn't relate to those groups anyway, or even the Down syndrome groups I couldn't relate to because my son has the autism and the Hirschsprung's. So there are some groups that are for multiple.
Yeah.
And that's been so, like, finally I was like, oh, these are my people. Because I
Yes.
get it.
Yes.
So you just have to try to search, and it's hard, like where to go. I don't know. You
Right.
just find it over the years. You guys
Yes.
have been, what, for 11 years, Reach has
Mhm.
been founded, and I just learned this past year. Thank
Yeah.
you, Dr. Shakshier.
And I think as an organization, we're really committed to obviously information sharing, but the information that Reach puts forth is fact-based, science-based. It comes from our board of physicians experts, not, Liz's opinion on a Tuesday morning. Do you know what I mean? So we do connect families in a shared community space, but that's not the information that we put forth, right? So, and that's something that Eric and I have talked about many times about, okay, we don't ever want anybody to be afraid. Obviously there's scary moments, but like the communication piece, which usually I will filter through, really careful that, there's science and there's facts, and then there's experiences, and those will vary.
Yeah, I wanted to sort of throw a different topic out there for the group. And that really relates to, parental care, self-care and support. And I'm interested in what folks are doing to take care of themselves. Besides Liz, who goes to Nashville when she needs some care.
Yeah, Liz does okay. Go on.
Any of our families?
Any of our families?
That means we're all
What do you
doing
do?
a bad
We're
job.
not doing. You forget sometimes, right? You forget to self-care for a really long time. You forget.
Yeah, well, I've always described it, especially when your kids are young, as you're in the trenches. Okay, so especially if you have a child who's not doing well. So, and that's usually all of us who end up at these symposiums. We're here because we have kids that didn't have the best outcomes. They've had some complications along the way. There's some obstacles, some struggles. So I always think of it when I'm talking to families like, oh, you're in the trenches. And I can see them because it is their 24-hour, 7-day a week focus. Is today the day that the shoe drops? It's today the day, and you live like that. And I agree with you. If I could go back and like sort of check myself, it would be that,
Self-care.
oh my gosh, like, okay, you've got to sometimes like remove yourself. It's okay to take a day off, to take 2 days off.
But it's also okay to let somebody else help, right?
Totally.
For the longest time, I did everything. I would, and only because I was the one at all the doctor's appointments. When we would go to Boston, it was always me. So unbeknownst, like I would push Chris and be like, I got this, like, let me do it. I know how to handle it. Like you. And then I let the reins go and I'm like, here, Chris, please do this. And like, it gave me that hour and a half or 2 hours of not having to do it. And then now he knows, how to do everything. So I think it's also accepting the help from your partner or family who wants to be involved and help accept it and give yourself that break, because you'll build like just this exhaustion and this just, I always do everything, nobody's helping me kind of mentality. And really you need to just say, oh, you would like to help me? Great. I'll be right back. I'm going to go to the grocery store.
And the reality is this is a lifelong disease. I feel in my personal experience that my son gets better and better all the time as he gets older, but it's still going to be a lifelong thing. So if I had to do the same thing.
We taught a friend how to do Benjamin's bag, and he had to. And I was like, my sister did it. My mom would do it, but then it gave us time as parents away too.
For sure.
On a similar note with the social media, I've had to remove myself and step back. Like, in order for me to cope and just do the best that I feel I can. I'm a researcher and I'm sure most of us are, but there are times for self-care, I need to purposely stop and just stop looking up and not feel bad that I'm not looking stuff up and that we're just surviving day to day, and that's okay. And you don't have to be all in and always look up everything and know everything. It's okay not to know everything.
Absolutely. And I think you actually taking care of you is taking care of your kids. I really do believe that now. I used to think that it had to just be full self-sacrifice.
100%.
Throw myself under the bus. It doesn't work that way because you're not of use to anybody when you've hit rock bottom. And so that is smart, mentally and physically. You can't be mentally engrossed in it day to day either. Like Alan, he once told me that he goes to bed thinking about Hirschsprungs and he wakes up thinking about Hirschsprungs. Me too. Weird. Same.
One thing I was wanting to just kind of also say, maybe a local community or state or program has like a respite program for other families that maybe don't have as many family members, but maybe there's like here in St. Louis, it's called St. Louis ARC, and they have respite care. So they might have a group of trained providers or something to look into for parental respite. Might be something
That's
to look into.
excellent. All right.
I'm gonna bring up a topic that we had talked about earlier, and so you had mentioned, I don't know. Talk to me about interacting with the healthcare provider that doesn't know, and what advice do you give to the healthcare provider that doesn't know or doesn't know your child as well, doesn't know the answer to the question and that interaction? My guess is you've all been there, yes?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, well, I think something that I have learned to judge the quality of the healthcare provider around is that litmus test. The healthcare provider that will say, I don't know, the field doesn't know, for me has always been a good indicator of their competence. And I think looking back, and Dr. Shakshir and I were talking about this last night and this morning, when Adrian was born, we had an unhealthy over-reliance on our healthcare providers' omnipotence and overconfidence in their competence. Which isn't to say that our doctors and surgeons aren't brilliant and haven't saved our child's life, because they have. But you, as a parent, especially early on, have to override that behavior that you have beaten into yourself, that doctors know everything. So you have to work against what you've been taught to believe about the healthcare system in this country, for the most part, if you're lucky. And then you really want to look for that signal of, hey, what do you know? What don't you know? Because it's only with that intellectual honesty that we can search together.
I honestly, I think I've grown to really appreciate, especially over the last 13 years, my son, the medical community, because you can't possibly know everything about everything. So one of the things that I learned really quickly was that when you have a child who's sick with Hirschsprung's and they're having something happen, in Canada, we take them to the emergency room. Well, I already know that the ER doctors aren't going to be familiar with Hirschsprung's. So if I could give any piece of advice, it would be, if you're, and I don't know how it works in the US, if you have to go through the ER as well, but it's to right away ask, is there a physician or a pediatric surgeon, somebody here who's got a familiarity with Hirschsprung's disease? Because a lot of the symptoms that present themselves, understandably, could be a lot of other different things. When I bring Malachi into the ER, it was always this: well, he's really bloated, he's vomiting, he's got a slight fever. This is all going on. And well, okay, that could be one of 100 viruses. And that's what they'd always say to me. Well, how do you know he doesn't have the flu? And that's when I become the devil in stilettos. I'm like, well, and it's like, I just thought, okay, this isn't getting us anywhere. So I always would just say, hey, and then I developed a relationship with my pediatric surgeon, so I'd be texting them, I already know what's wrong. And they would phone the ER and say, don't even bother, just send her upstairs to CK3. But, I would just say, like, hey, is there anybody here that has a familiarity? Trust me, I know. And got much more diplomatic about it as I learned.
I know, I agree with the ER. We had a similar situation. We went into the ER with Benjamin, his stoma was protruding out, and the ER doctor walked in and goes, what's wrong with him? And I'm like, he has Hirschsprung's. And she looks at me and goes, what's that? I have no idea. Yeah. And I've learned to rely on the nurses, right? Like the nurses are just as helpful. And that the nurse that night pulled the doctor aside and said, ER doctors, they don't always know. Yeah. And she said, here's what Hirschsprung's is. Like, this is what you should probably do. Here's the steps you should take. And this is when we were still in Denver and see our doctor, and we didn't have access to get a hold of him. Mm-hmm. But I do think you rely on the nurses too. And sure. Anybody, ask anybody, is there a nurse? Is there anybody that knows anything about Hirschsprung's that can get me connected with the right person?
Yeah. And one of the initiatives of REACH, I'll just speak just quickly. One of the initiatives of REACH is to actually really spend some time, and we have been over the last 10 years, educating pediatricians, ER doctors, like people with more information about Hirschsprung. So they might be able to pick that up in the ER or sometimes even the NCO Preces clinics. I know in Canada, in our hospital, we've been putting brochures or reach brochures in those clinics. We've been putting them in emergency so they can flag those things a little bit sooner, hopefully, or catch the odd one that happens. I mean, let's be honest, it's rare. Most kids aren't going to come through the ER, but when they do, of course, it's just natural that it might get missed. So it's an education thing, not only for families, but I think we talked about it many years ago. It also, we wanted to educate people within the medical community too. So it's just on their radar.
I just wanted to just point out the Hirschsprung's passport that Reach has.
Yes.
That's a great tool to
Mhm.
carry with you. So if you are in a place where the doctors or nurses don't know what Hirschsprung's is, that you can just give that to them. And also the website, the Reach website has a lot of basic information about Hirschsprung disease, and everybody's got a computer on their phone now. So like and all emergency departments, of course, have computers that,
Sure.
so they can just pull it up and do a quick 5-minute kind of update. Okay, this is what we're dealing with.
Yeah, I will say just, we have come such a long way in this field since Adrian was born 2006. It's really encouraging. We haven't held a symposium in 3 years, and the field has moved in the last 3 years. This whole multidisciplinary approach, which I think is novel. I think it's incredibly helpful for parents. This sort of one-stop shop approach did not exist in 2006, 7, 8, which isn't a knock on what there was. It's just saying that, our healthcare providers, you folks are really listening and you're responding, and it's working. It's great.
Mhm.
Thank you.
Unless anyone has any other comments, I think we'll close out this session and thank you all for your time.
Thank
you.
you.